All right, so there's my name. I've got all kinds of initials. I need to find a couple more to put on there so I can have more, move more forward about that. I am a consultant, but I also, I've written a bunch of books and I also actually teaching now. So that's the side benefit of being a teacher is I make my wife call me professor. So, and so I've been 40 years plus in healthcare technology management. I was talking to Steve next door a while ago. We were talking about going to biomed school and he goes, when did you graduate? And I said, well, I went to USAMIOS in 76, graduated in 77 and came back, I think 78 or 79. So I've been in the field a long time. I said consultant, author, educator. I did help write the CHTM test a long time ago for Amy, serving lots of committees with them, treasurer and past president of HTMA North Texas, and written several books and working on several more on a wide variety of topics. And that's probably an understatement. So a lot of these are biomed books. I've got Tales of Biomed Part 2. I'm working on Part 3. I'm working on one called Tales of the IT Guy. And then I have actually 2 books or 3 books. These 2 are done on World War II. This one I'm working on. This one I'm working on Incredible Tales and a Cigar Diary. I've already done that. So lots of free time. So my experience with IT, I did report to, I worked for Baylor Healthcare System or Baylor Scott & White for many years. I don't know, 36 years I think I worked for them. And the last 12 to 15 years I was there, we actually reported to IT, directly reported to IT. So I learned a lot about how IT operates. I also obtained during that time A+, Microsoft Networking and Itil. And then we trained a lot of our staff on A+ and Network+. And of course, like you, I'm the CIO and CISO of my home network. My wife does not like it when I tell her to put in a help ticket if something goes wrong. That really drives her over the edge. So I've kind of stopped doing that. So kind of what we want to do today is learn how to better communicate with IT, understand more about how IT and how they operate, learn how we differ between IT and biomed, and understand what IT needs from biomed. And again, if you guys got questions, just raise your hand or throw something at me and we'll stop and share it. We do only have 55 minutes, but I think we can get through it. If you've got a good example that you want to share of how you're addressing something at your healthcare system, that's a great way to share it. We've got plenty of people here. That's probably a good audience to share it with. So why am I certified in IT? So I built and understood, I built PCs forever. I still build PCs at home instead of usually buying them. I've actually built Macintoshes, which sounds odd if you ever had done Mac, but in the old days, you could buy a used Mac and tear it apart and put it in a PC case and it was a little bit cheaper. I did finally realize I did not understand networking, so I went to school to get training and certification. So short story on that. You guys familiar with GE and the Muse network, right? So that's the system where you store all your ECG images. So we were having a meeting, Biomed, IT, and GE. We had a meeting with them, and we were talking about how all this stuff was going to tie together and network and all that type of stuff. And I'm sitting in this meeting, and as a biomed, I'm actually embarrassed because I had no clue what they were talking about. I understand stuff going on in network, all that type of stuff, but I didn't understand how it talked and everything. And I'm serious. That was probably Friday. Literally that afternoon, I called somebody to get training on networking. And before I could do networking, I had to do the A+ track, and then I did networking. And then I was going to do MCSE. I don't know if Microsoft still does MCSE. And I finally decided I'm actually a manager. Shouldn't be doing this. My techs should be doing this. And so that's why we went and got the techs all trained on it. We actually even got it to where we paid extra for the certification. Not A+, but once you got Network Plus and above, I think it was 25 or 50 cents an hour more. And we're talking 20, 30 years ago when we did this. Some people think networking is a new thing. Networking has been around forever for patient monitoring. When I was at Baylor, we had GE networking forever. I mean, probably when it was Marquette days, right, from the 80s. And I think they finally put on a network. Space Labs was on a network for a long time. It was all an isolated network, but you should know a lot about IT networking anyway, because it's been used for patient monitoring for a long time. If you're not getting trained, if you are getting trained on anything, and specifically we're talking about IT, my feeling is just go and get the initials next to your name, right? You're paying for the training, go and take the test and get the initials next to your name. I think sometimes having those initials next to your name, you give somebody a business card, if people still do that, they kind of have an assumption that you know what you're talking about, right? If I've got Itil or something like that, then the person you're talking to, if they're in IT, they go, okay, I don't have to talk down. I can talk at the same level with this person. A lot of employers are starting to look for IT certification. And most we're going to talk more about IT than biomed certification. I talked to some hospitals in the Dallas-Fort Worth area where I work, and I think it's Texas Health Resources. They're actually requiring, I think, level 2 BMEDs to have some type of IT certification. So I can't remember if it's Itil or if it's Network Plus. I've always felt A+ should be a minimum, right? Everybody should have that if you're working on medical equipment. Again, why do we need to work with IT? Probably now, I think that this is a pretty current number. 50% or more of our medical equipment is connected to the network or the internet somehow. So whether it's IV pumps, imaging, patient monitoring, whether it's wired or wireless, that's a lot of equipment out there that's connected somehow. And we differ a lot more than IT, whereas IT might have all Dell computers or all HP computers. You guys know this, we have a little bit of everything, right? And so it really frustrates IT a lot when we have all these different vendors out there. They want us to standardize. You can't do that. The vendor is providing that laptop or that desktop computer. This was something on LinkedIn, I don't know, a year or so ago. Within 5 years, 75% of medical devices sold will be connected, which kind of makes sense, right? It's only going to get more and more things are out there going to be connected to the internet somehow. So this is kind of an introduction to the next slide. I'm assuming everybody in this room was a biomed or they worked in biomed. You took an A&P class, right, when you were going through class. I hope it was a requirement. So it's a fundamental building block of medical practice. We learn about structure of the body, learn about internal organs and tissues, all that type of stuff. We also learn medical terminology to better understand and communicate with clinicians, right? I mean, if a nurse or physician is telling us something, I've got no clue what they're talking about because they're talking clinical ease. I'm at a disadvantage, right? I need to know what they're telling me so I can understand and translate it into my head so I can work better with them. And actually, you have to be careful that we don't then go back and translate back to them with techies, right? We don't get them too technical talk. We have to get back to them in their clinical field. And if you like, I'm a big Calvin and Hobbes fan. If you like this one, I've been waiting on the bus. Here I am waiting for the bus, 11 more years of school to go, then college and maybe graduate school, and then I work until I die. And of course, the response, what kind of world is this? You only get 5 years to be a kid. Hopefully, most of you guys realize you never stop learning, right? I mean, yes, you're gonna have formal education years, whether it's high school, college, technical screen, you're always gonna be learning something new. So now this segues into IT communication and why I think IT education and IT communication is so important. If you guys have worked with IT, you know what an incident means to IT. Well, this is a definition out of ITSM from Wikipedia. An unplanned interruption to an IT service or reduction in the quality of an IT service or failure of configuration item that has not yet impacted an IT service, for example, failure of one disk from a mirror set. Okay, so what does that really mean in layman's terms? Just something happened, right? Just something happened. It's an incident, but it's something happened. If we say, if you're up on the floor and a nurse or physician talks to you and they say we had an incident, what does that mean to you? Yeah, probably patient harm or something. Something's not good. You see how those exact same words mean two completely different things, right? So you have to be careful about what your words are and what context that they're used in. So again, I'll highlight this. Why don't we learn information technology to better communicate and understand what IT is talking about, just like we did anatomy and physiology? So what do we need to do? Obviously learn new skills, learn from IT and their best practices, and learn from other healthcare systems. Part of that in preparing for new skills is just prepare for the future. Get your CBED or CRES if you're a BMed. Remember, we don't have CLES anymore. That's been retired. Get your A+, Net Plus, Security Plus. Finish a degree if you don't have an AAS. Get your CHTM and Itil if you're in management. Get a bachelor's degree if you're interested in management. I'm a big believer in that. If you want to manage people, if you guys ever transferred from a BMed to a manager, it's a totally, I mean, literally it's 180 degrees out on how you're managing. You're managing people now instead of PMs and work orders and stuff like that. You really need, I couldn't emphasize this enough to go get a bachelor's degree in business management. And that's what I did. I mean, when I moved up in the ranks, I went and got a business degree in here. And the thing to take away from this is you can't get these things overnight. So if some of us are good about writing goals down. I mean, that's the way you're supposed to do it. I always just had it in back of my mind what I want to do when I grow up. And so I would kind of, in my mind, lay out plans, what I want to do. So if I want to become a manager or a director or over a big healthcare system, and I know that I need to have a business degree or a bachelor's degree or 4-year degree of some type, probably one, you should be in the job description, right? It's going to have a 4-year degree. Well, then go out and get that, right? Unless it's, I'm sure you can get someone to mail overnight, but they're not going to be good. You have to go to school to get your degree. I went to school, I think, for 10 years. You know, I'd work all day long, then I'd go to school at night to get my bachelor's degree. And then once I got my bachelor's degree, I took a year off and I go, well, everybody's got a bachelor's degree. If they're in management, I'm going to get an MBA. So then I took another 2 years to get that. So you can't, it's not going to happen overnight. Get these things and plan it out and get it done. And then when that job comes up, you'll already be ready for it. The worst thing that can happen is a job comes up and it's like, oh, I always wanted to be a director, but I don't have a business degree. Well, you're not going to get it overnight, right? You have to wait. So get that stuff done. Knock it off your list. So a little bit, are y'all familiar with A+ and Network Plus and all those? Do I need to go through these slides that much? Is anybody not familiar with them? Okay, a couple not familiar with them. So CompTIA, they're the people who certify people for A+. And basically A+ is the hardware and software of computers. They touch a little bit on networking, but here is from CompTIA.org, hardware, operating system troubleshooting, networking, hardware and network troubleshooting, mobile devices, security, and operational procedures. I don't remember what the test costs nowadays. I did my A+ a long time ago, so long ago that I don't have to renew it. You know, that CBET was that way for a while now too, but most certifications you get nowadays, after so many years, you've got to renew it or get continuing education or something. Net Plus, so networking concepts, infrastructure, network operations, network security, network troubleshooting and tools. So it's much more deeper than what you found on A+. And oh, by the way, I'll give a plug for where I'm teaching right now. Part of the curriculum for the biomed students where I teach, A+ and Network Plus is a requirement for biomed students to graduate, which I think makes sense to me, right? I mean, if half the stuff is going to be on a network, they need to know how IT stuff works. And so it's a requirement. And the other thing that's even better is I don't teach it. And I mean that in a good way. We're having an IT person teach that class. So it's not just biomed students going to it, it's other people that are getting the IT field. They're doing the A+ and Network Plus. And I've been telling my students, you might as well go and get certified. You're doing the class, get certified at the end of it. You're going to stand out with everybody else when you go get a job. And then if you're going to get further into IT, meaning if you're getting into like the cybersecurity, like the guy from Armis just mentioned a while ago, I would highly recommend you do Security Plus. So threats, attacks, vulnerabilities, technology and tools, architecture, risk management, stuff like that. So all the Security Plus. Now for managers, and those first 3 slides I mentioned, to me, that should be a minimum for techs, right? If you want to move up, if you want to get ahead in what we're going to do, get those 3 certifications. I'm not discounting CBET, I'm not discounting CRES. I'd highly recommend those also, but we're talking more about the IT side of the business now. I would get those. For managers, I would highly recommend you do Itil. So Itil is Information Technology Infrastructure Library. It's basically a set of detailed practices. The way I always remember it, it's kind of like best practice for IT management. So somebody got together years ago to develop this thing. So service strategy, service design, service operation, continuous service improvement. When I was still working at Baylor, and I don't remember if I was a manager or director then, and my boss said, hey, they're going to give a free ITIL class. Would you like to do it? And I go, absolutely, it's free. I'll get another certification. I can put something else next to my name, right? I want to do it. I learned so much more from that class because I was in IT, and you'll see a slide later. When you're in IT, it's all about IT. It's not about biomed because we're a small piece of the pie, and I'll show you that pie later. And so I'm in these meetings with all the other directors in IT, and I have no clue what these guys are talking about. I mean, they're talking about this and this and that and that, and it's like, I got no clue, guys. And then when I finally did this ITIL class, it's like, oh, now I know why they talk that way. Now I know why this is so important. That's best practice for IT. Highly recommend if you're going to be in management or you want to get into management, get your ITIL certification, and it'll help you understand more what they're talking about, and why IT does things a certain way. And obviously the additional learning you can get, just like y'all are here. So we have webinars from Amy, TechNation, 24/7. Vendors do a lot of those trade shows. Subscribe to IT related subjects like cybersecurity. I think I used to have question marks on YouTube, but there's so much training on YouTube nowadays. Holy cow. I actually use YouTube videos at school, because why reteach something that somebody else has already done a great job? You guys know Justin from Better Biomed. I don't know how many videos he's got out there, 60 to 100, something like that. I actually have my students watch some of those sometimes, because he actually does a pretty good job of explaining stuff. You can also manage your network at your home, and I mean, I kind of say that laughingly, but the more you understand this, the more you're going to set up your network a little bit smarter, right? And I found this years ago, and I thought this was funny. I'm a geek at heart, so this kind of fits into my wheelhouse real well. And so I've got all this home automation stuff in my house, and I got a message on my phone. It says, you need to upgrade the firmware on your smart light bulb, on a light bulb. I had a light bulb, it says you need to upgrade the firmware. Like, I didn't know there was firmware on a light bulb. But I think it was a Philips Hue, but I think all of them are probably fairly similar. So just go to the app and says, okay, we'll update it then. I'm not sure why you're asking me, but update it. And so it did. So I thought that was kind of ironic. I get this $20 light bulb, and I've got to update the software in it. The other thing I want to say is, I guess just be cautious with IT education. For me, it really has come slow. I mean, sometimes this stuff just does not make sense to me. You can tell me, you can tell me, you can tell me, you can tell me, I'm still not getting it. And one thing that I would do is I just continue to read or find another source to learn something from. And I've actually tell my students the same thing. You know, I could come up and preach to you guys forever, and if you're not getting my message, it's not helping you. Sometimes you just got to go ask somebody else or read another way. And then finally, you know, the light bulb, preferable light bulb goes off in your head. It's like, oh, now it makes sense. I've been reading all this stuff for a while, but now that I put all this stuff together, that last thing I've read now lines it all up, and it makes more sense. So don't get discouraged. I would just say continue to plug away at it. And you're going to make mistakes. And sometimes, and I tell my students this all the time, you almost want them to make mistakes, because sometimes if you walk somebody through a problem without them experiencing the hard ways to do it, they don't get it. It doesn't get burned in your brain as much. So sometimes I think going through this, as much as you don't like to do it, by making those mistakes and making the wrong choices initially, finally when you get it, it's like, now I know why these things didn't work initially. You get better at it. So just like it takes time for to get knowledge, and just like BMEDs, right? You guys graduate, we're not automatically repairing everything that's sit on our table. We're not, you know, we can't do a PM, you know, it might take 2 hours instead of an hour. It takes a long time, right? It's like riding a bicycle. Once you get used to it, you get better at it. And the other thing I think is really important about any new knowledge, and especially IT, at least for me, is I can get taught something, and if I don't use it for a year, half a year, well, it's like I never went, right? And so you've got to find ways to always keep practicing of what you've been taught. I do want to give some titles of some common names that you'll probably hear. CIO, probably most of y'all have heard that, Chief Information Officer, right? They're the ones that is in charge of the IT department in your hospital. They typically report, you guys have heard of the C-suite of the hospital, right? So your CEO, Chief Executive Officer, CFOs, Chief Financial Officer, CNO, Chief Nursing Officer. And I'm a big World War II buff. I just found out CNO means something else. Any Navy people here? Chief Naval Officer. It's like, oh, wow, I didn't know that. And there's a couple other ones, but CISO is actually a fairly new one. And I've actually seen, and I don't remember if this was in a webinar I attended or not, but I think I've actually heard some people recommend the CISO does not report to the CIO. They report directly to the C-suite. And I think it's almost a conflict of interest, right? And I hope I don't butcher this wrong. You know, the CIO is over everything, and including the budget and all that type of stuff. And so they might pinch money for security, and that's why I think they want this person, the CISO, not necessarily always reporting to the CIO. Doesn't mean it's right or wrong, but I've heard that before. They want them to be different, so they're not under the realms of the CIO. And then, if anybody's worked with IT, there's a bunch of these VPs: infrastructure, security, help desk, field support, PMOs, which are project management office, and applications. And this is based on my experience at Baylor. I would assume that I keep saying we, haven't been there for 5 years. It's probably fairly common where you're at. So here's an example. So since I was in IT for a long time, I had all the information about how big everything was. So I thought I would do this little pie graph to give a better idea of how HTM and the rest of IT looks. So here's biomed down here. So in this organization, we represented 9% of the total IT group. And I can't remember how many people we had, 1,000, 1,500 people total in IT. So in biomed, I say biomed loosely because it was everything: imaging, lab, biomed, nurse call, stretchers. We had everything was under our control.
Is that based on personnel or
personnel?
Budget?
You know, I think it almost was the same. Yeah, good question. So I think it was kind of close to the same. The budget might have been a little bit higher, but it was pretty close. Here's the thing that really shocked me is 43% of IT had to do with application support. Well, you think about how many applications. I mean, literally, what doesn't run on an application nowadays at a hospital? And now we're probably going to think, since we're in biomed, we're thinking more of the clinical operation type application. Guys, there's a ton of stuff out there. There's HR. There's all kinds of other applications that are running out there, not necessarily clinical minded, but you can just look up and down this list. There's a ton of clinical applications in there. The other thing I think, in my opinion, what we tend to do when we think about IT per se is we compare ourselves to field support, right? So field support are the people that take care of the desktop computers. So they repair desktop computers, they install, deinstall, they do printers, stuff like that, but that's mostly what they do. I think a lot of times we as biomeds tend to think, well, IT is those guys and gals that take care of the computers. It's a lot bigger than that. I mean, look at this. Just help desk is 11%. And this was before it was outsourced. Project management is actually pretty big, 3%. Infrastructure, so infrastructure is going to be all your network switches, all your cabling, all your UPSs, all your infrastructure, right? Just stuff in between that allows everything to run. You've got security, which is just 4%, and you don't probably see there's probably a sliver of less than 1%, which is administration. Biomed, telecom, so your desktop phone, stuff like that. They didn't do, at that hospital, they did, or for Baylor, they did not do nurse call. We did nurse call. Hope this helps a little bit. I mean, when I did this, it kind of blew me away how big each of those little pieces of pie, or small, each of them were. So the structure at my former job, pretty typical. We had an imaging director with imaging managers and imaging engineers 1 and 2. We had a biomed director, which was me. We had system regional managers. Now before I left, we had 25 something hospitals throughout North Texas. We had BMEDs 1, 2, and senior. We actually required our senior BMEDs to be CBET certified before you got promoted to senior. So if you wanted, remember I talked about incentivization, right? If you want to become a senior BMED down the road, get certified. We'll pay for it. We'll give you the training. We'll do that. We'll pay for your recertification, all that stuff. But if that's what you want to do, you have to do it before that BMED 3 position opens up. And then we actually had a clinical engineering team, which is, they did all the database, project management, cybersecurity. And so just before I left, the biomed group, and actually we changed our name to HTM, reported to a VP in supply chain. I think it's still that way. So here's a very high level, simplistic view of how I view IT. IT is more project based than HTM. I mean, think about how many projects you guys, just think at your hospital, how many things are going out. So we've got an HR system and now we're going to replace it, or we got an EMR system and now we're replacing it or updating it, or we have some other application out there. There's always some project going on. If you could ever, and again, I was fortunate since I was a director in IT, I could see all those projects they have. We're talking hundreds of projects these guys have going on all the time simultaneously. Now we're a big healthcare system, but some of them are minor, but there's something always going on here. Oops. Oh, that's my phone. And the one thing I found, and actually I thought this was actually pretty darn cool, because I'm sure anybody that's been in biomed for a while, somebody's going to tell you we need to cut costs. We need to find a way to reduce costs. And you're scratching your head trying to find out, how am I going to do that? It's up to you to figure that out. IT, if they need to cut costs and they have a governance committee, there's a governance committee that oversees what biomed or all the projects for the healthcare system. They help decide which ones you want to keep and which. So what I think, and I'm simplistically doing this. So here's all my projects, and this is X million dollars. And they go, well, you've got to take $100 million out of that. Okay, well, now my line moves up to here, and this is the only projects I can do. Tell me which ones down here go up here and which ones here go down here, right? The governance committee decides what project they're going to go forward with and not. I think that's actually a pretty neat idea. Yeah, so basically you need to cut 10%, prioritize projects. Onus is on the governance committee. So HTM and biomed cost cutting, and I'll pick on an old boss I had that was IT. He actually told me, he said, well, can't you just not fix stuff? Now, I'll be honest, I didn't say no, but in my mind, I'm thinking, what is this guy telling me? I didn't say that out loud. But then actually, one of the things I learned, maybe this comes with maturity, is like, you know what, maybe I'm way oversimplifying this and I just need to take it apart. Maybe there are things we can't do or should do. And I think I came up with a kind of an algorithm of, you know, we prioritize certain types of equipment, and maybe something that wasn't high priority, we would maybe repair a little bit slower. That didn't go over with nursing, but I mean, at least I worked with it. And I actually was proud of myself that I didn't, you know, just push him off, but, you know, look into it, right? Sometimes people outside telling you to do something, you've got to look at their perspective, and maybe he's got something I'm not seeing. So one, if I've got a way to cut costs, well, maybe I can do less PMs. Everybody's familiar with an AEM, right? Right? So an AEM is one way you can do less PMs within requirements, right? What everybody know familiar with AEM? What can I not do an AEM on? Imaging, right? I mean, that's the biggest one. I think lasers is the other one, and then equipment without prior history, and that's actually fuzzy. Yeah, okay. So that's one thing you can do. And I think sometimes as biomeds, we tend to way overthink. We tend to think black and white, and Joint Commission, DNV, all those people like to do grayscale stuff, right? And so there's a lot of people who have done stuff on AEM strategy. If you're thinking about doing an AEM strategy, just somebody's already figured it out. Just talk to them, right? Don't beat yourself against the wall. One, can you reduce coverage on contracts or eliminate contracts, right? So if you're familiar with contracts, whether it's gold, silver, and bronze or something like that, you know, maybe I can reduce this. I'll give you an example. I was fortunate that we had our CFO gave us all the lab contracts. It was under my budget. That did not make the lab directors happy about that. And so simplistically, again, I just got rid of every contract. I'm going to go at risk, and I'm going to find out what's costing me money, right? And I talked to the directors about this. I would go to their meeting. I go, guys, I don't remember how I put it, but I'm not an idiot. If I'm losing money by calling in somebody time materials on this reagent thing or whatever, I'm going to get a contract on it, right? I'm not going to lose money on that. But I'm going to try to find a way that we can not reduce the level of service that you're getting, but also save money, right? That's kind of the goal. And so one of the examples I gave them is maybe gold is 24/7 coverage, and maybe we never use these machines on the weekend. Well, then quit doing gold coverage if we're not using it on the weekend. And then maybe bronze, I think it's in the middle, maybe it's Monday to Friday, 24 hours a day or 12 hours a day or something like that. You can talk to your directors and find a way we can reduce the cost of this contract. You can save a lot of money between each one of these. By reducing the level of that, your contract doesn't change per se, it's just your time frame. And then you can say, well, yeah, maybe twice a year I get called in a weekend to do something on the lab. Then how much did it cost you? And did it exceed what you would have paid for a full contract, right? Make it simple the way you can calculate this. And obviously bring in service if you're using contracts. So here's something I've also seen, I thought was interesting, and I've heard this from several sources. So everybody familiar with cost of service ratio? So cost of service ratio is the cost to service all medical equipment divided by the asset cost. That's roughly how it is. So IT their cost of service ratio is 15 to 25% of asset value and is typically software only. Based on when I talk to people, it's just a software contract. It's not hardware. Whereas biomed tends to be 5 to 6% tends to be the sweet spot. That's where they think you're doing a good job financially, right? It's a financial measurement only. And it's usually just hardware based. What I'm starting to see now is more of this IT cost of service ratio creeping into the HTM space, which is scaring the low, it's just scaring me. I mean, I'm really concerned about this 5 to 6% that we've had going on for a long time that we think is a good financial benchmark. This is going to start creeping in there, which means this number is going to start creeping up. And part of that is additional cost of cybersecurity and additional cost of application support. I'll give you an example. I won't mention the company, but we had this vendor that did all of our patient monitoring, and since it was biomed, it was under me. We had it everywhere in the system. Well, how many people, most of your vendors now, is just a Windows 7 or Windows 10 or Windows whatever machine, right, that's sitting at the central station that's doing all this stuff. Well, you guys know that's going to have to be replaced every so often. There's a patch or something else what to do. And now they're going out and pushing software, basically application support for this, which I'm pretty sure was close to the 10 to 15 or 25%, which I never would have had before. I don't think I have it in the slides. And this probably helps maybe this a little bit too. You guys have been in biomed for a long time. How long does medical equipment last, per se? Ballpark.
7 years.
10 years. Yeah. So 7 years is kind of the that's a financial write-off typically, right? But we know that it lasts longer than that, right? I could have patient monitoring that's lasted 10, 15, 20, depends on what it is. Even some X-ray equipment. You've got some stuff that could just last forever because there's nothing really been changed and it works fine. I can still get parts. So why change it? IT, if you guys ever worked with IT, and even if you don't work with IT, you probably have a desktop computer or a laptop computer. What is IT doing every 3 to 5 years? They're replacing them, right? And they're probably replacing them, one, because that's what they've learned either through Itil or something like that. We're just gonna replace all this equipment every 3 to 5 years. Now, part of it's age related, part of it's because the newest OS doesn't support a machine 3 to 5 years old. Some applications don't run as well. So they go nuts when they see that we have stuff sitting around here 10, 15, 20 years old, and they go, why haven't you replaced it? I go, well, give me some money and we'll replace it, right? I mean, it takes money to replace all this stuff. So that's one thing that you'll have when you're working with IT and biomed. They don't understand why we let stuff run for a long time. They also don't understand why we don't have contracts on everything. I was always shocked, and maybe I don't understand the IT part enough. The field service guys that are doing all the desktop computers, and probably everybody has Dell. I mean, almost everybody has a Dell computer for their system. That's their standard. Well, they had a contract on them. So I'm thinking, what are these guys doing, right? I mean, if it's under a contract and it's covered for 3 years, I guess they just go out and take it, and hard drive's bad, they get another one from Dell and stick it in and put it back on. It's like, why don't you just, if you get all off the same computer, why don't you train your techs to do it? I mean, that's the biomed mentality, right? And that's a good example of how that differs from what IT thinks. So how has IT affected HTM? Off-the-shelf computers, OS on medical equipment, we kind of talked about that. I'm sure everybody has seen this. I don't know where you could go that it's not affected like this. Networked medical equipment definitely requires new skills for your staff, requires new ways to support equipment. I don't know if you guys, when you first started interfacing your bedside monitors into an EHR or EMR, is in the old days, if I had a patient monitor in the ICU go bad, I would just take it out, I'd put another one in, and I'd change the bed number, and it worked, right? It's not interfacing to anything. Doesn't work that way anymore. You've got to have all kinds, and I don't know enough about it, but basically you've got to contact somebody on the EHR team, says, okay, ICU 3 just went out, I'm putting another one in, this is the IP address, this is what's gonna do, and they're gonna map everything out. It's much more complex than what it used to be as a tech, and that's a huge learning curve for a tech that's done this way for probably his whole life, right? Just go ahead and replace it, put the new bed number in and go forward. There's a whole bunch more stuff you got to do behind the scenes for it to communicate directly with the EHR. If you ever have anybody replaced a network switch on a patient on any type of network at your hospital? So I'll date myself. So when we first had patient monitoring. We didn't have switches, we had hubs. You guys know what a hub is? Just, it's like a dumb switch, right? I mean, and so we had I remember the first time I got called about a network problem. I was still a tech, and I had a person in the ER call me, or maybe you saw me in the hallway. He goes, you know, we just had a person in the ER. We just transferred him to ICU. I wanted to look on the network to see how that person was doing. I can't see him. Like, really? So I opened a network closet, and I got this whole rack of stuff in there. And I'm like, you know, what's wrong? And I see a red light on. So I called the company up, and they go, yeah, you probably got a bad port on your hub. Just unplug it, plug it in another one. And I did. It worked. I put tape over that other switch, you know, so nobody would use it. Worked fine. And then probably less than a year later, we had another hospital. The whole hub went down for, I think, either the whole hospital or at least all of ICU. And so, you know, I just find out, okay, who makes this hub? I'm going to buy it from some IT vendor, not from the company who would buy it from somebody else, right? Like the Philips or the GE or somebody. I just bought it, stuck it in there. There's no configuration of the hub. I just plug it in, unplug it, plug it in, it works. Save hundreds of dollars by doing that. You can't do that now. When a switch goes out, you've got to have the configuration file, and I haven't done this yet, but you have to know how to program that stuff. And oh, by the way, if you don't know how to program it, you'd better have that backup file somewhere. So when that switch goes to go bad, you can put that configuration back on there. And I think most of us know you can't just buy medical equipment and put it on network anymore. You've got to have it configured, and you have to have it approved by IT. This one I talk a little bit more in one of my other talks about why major vendors are coming into health IT. Everybody know who Alphabet is? Google, right? And then Amazon, Apple, Microsoft. So they all got, this is a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. So you could say, why are these people getting involved in healthcare? Anybody want to guess? Yeah, I mean, if you always watch the spy shows, like I love to watch, Follow the Trail of Money. I mean, that's what it's about. So they're looking, and it's either because I'm making money or I'm what? I'm reducing my cost. There's been a bunch of stuff. I might have it on another slide. Amazon has actually been buying companies, and so now their employees now can go to that for healthcare, and you're basically kind of cutting out the middleman, right? I worked at Baylor, and we merged with Scott and White, and the story I always heard was Scott and White had a health plan or an insurance plan, and so now what are you doing? You're cutting out the Blue Cross or Aetna or people like that, because everything's got a profit markup on it, right? You can't do it without staying in business. You have to make a profit. And so that was one of the reasons I heard is now we're basically self-insuring with our own insurance plan for that system. People that work for that healthcare system could still go outside and get Blue Cross or go outside and do Aetna, but you're going to pay a higher premium, right? So the company saved money by doing that. So you can make more money or you can save money, kind of the same idea. Yeah, so here's some of those. So this one is, so Walmart gets into healthcare. They're actually going to where you can get a checkup for $30, teeth cleaning for $25. $25 for teeth cleaning is pretty cheap. Former Apple CEO, Walmart's healthcare service, it calls Consumer Revolution. I think that goes with this. And then this was where I worked, Baylor, Scott and White. They're actually working, opening clinics. And Tom Thumb is a local grocery store in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So they're actually opening up those clinics inside there. I'm sure part of it is brand awareness, right? So you go to this store and you see the Baylor, Scott and White name. I'm going to do something here. I had good service. Now I'm going to go to their hospital. But part of it also is just a way to direct people in there. Has anybody bought the Cardio Mobile or know what that is? I forgot to bring it with me, but a couple of people have. It's actually pretty neat. I had a friend of mine, he was biomed, and he actually bought one of these. We had lunch one time and he was showing it to me. And I'm thinking, and I said, why do you have that? He said, well, actually my doctor told me to get it because he's got AFib or he's got some heart condition. He recommended he do this. It used to be $99, now it's $79. And I'm geeky, I don't have a heart condition. And I go, well, I'm getting one too. Because I mean, I think it's cool. And so I could record my heart rate. I thought it was kind of cool. And literally, you just touch it and it shows your waveform up on your screen. It's pretty neat. And so this is what the printout looks like. So your name is in there. You've got you guys know what that is, right? Your little calibration pulse, then your ECG. This is what you got back from a live core. You can store it with a live core. I don't know if it's still $10 a month, but that you could do. I'm cheap. I don't do that. I just email it to myself, right? I mean, I could email it to myself free, and I just stick it in a folder on my computer. And what I thought that was pretty cool, they encrypt it. Holy cow, that's a smart idea. I mean, it's PHI, right? So here's a little test for you. So remember when I was doing this, I've got this device, and I want to show, so if you think you know the answer, raise your hand, don't blurt it out. So I'm using my ECG, and I'm touching it like this to get my ECG recording. You guys, I hope you guys are familiar with ECGs, right? Lead 1, 2, 3, AVR, AVR, V lead, all that type of stuff. What lead would I be getting if I have my finger on something? If you know that, raise your hand. No, raise your hand, don't say it out loud. Anybody know it? There's a prize in it for you, let's put it this way. And I'm not gonna throw anything at you to get it wrong. Who knows what it is? Yes. Lead 2? Okay, how come it's lead 2? Okay, so I'm using this hand here, right? And I'm using this hand here. What is this? What is this? What is this configuration? Right arm, what's this one? Left arm. So what lead configuration is that? Lead 1. It's not lead 2. We like to think it's lead 2. And I think 1, we jump on lead 2 because, oh, well, look at the size of that waveform. It looks like it's lead 2, but it's not. And believe me, I was not taught this when I was in the Army. There's your prize. And so, even though you got the first answer wrong, I'll give you. I just think this is so critical that, again, this almost goes back to the A&P, but it's the clinical side. A biomed needs to know this information, right? When you're going into the hospital or going to the ICU and they're saying lead 2 is not working, well, then don't go start working on stuff that has anything to do with lead 2, or looking at something else, right? Or find out what's isolated to lead 2 and then work on that way. Apple Watch, and I just got the new Apple Watch that came out. So ever since Apple Watch 4, so 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 can take an ECG, and it even has fall detection, which is actually kind of cool. So you're starting to get my age, you're going to get Al's age. You know, we need to worry about falling. So if I fall, there's some algorithm in there, and I've heard people trying it. You know, they fall on the ground, it doesn't work. They've got to figure out somehow, if I truly fall, this thing will call 911. Pretty cool. And now you can fall and you go, no, I'll just delay, right? I mean, hit no, I'm okay. And I just heard the latest one, so Apple Watch 8, there's crash detection in there. So if you're in a car accident, now I've heard there's some problems with people on roller coasters. I just heard that the other day. They just came out with it. There's a learning curve. No, I'm okay. The paramedics are sitting at the bottom of the roller coaster waiting for you. You okay? So this is what kind of the same idea. This is the waveform. So I get from my ECG. It's always, I want to say always, like a while ago, it checked my heart rate 4 minutes ago and it puts it on the screen. But you can also push it, it'll do same thing. When I do Apple Watch, here's how I do it. I touch it like that. That's how simple it is. You hold it for 30 seconds, just like I would with the other one with my 2 fingers. Now the back of my watch is using this arm, right? And then my finger is the other arm, so it's still lead 1. That's actually pretty cool. So I talked about fall detection. I picked on Al. So part of this, and this again, some of it's on my other one, talking about the future, but this still has to do with IT. The future of HTM or biomed, whatever you want to call it, it's moving toward IT. And I know sometimes, especially some of us older guys, it frustrates the heck out of us, but that's just the way it's working. We're going to have more stuff that's going to be working from home: ECG, non-invasive blood pressure, pulse ox, glucose, doctor to patient over the web, patients going to alternative sources. And I think, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to highlight it, so who takes care of that, right? So is it IT that's taking care of that? Is it biomed taking care of that? I might have it on one of the last slides, but I'll put it here. We have to be careful about pushing back on stuff in HTM or biomed. You know, we say, that's not biomed, or that's not this, that's not this. Pretty soon, you're not gonna be doing anything. And they're gonna start questioning, why I even have you here, right? And so I'm not saying I was perfect at it as a director either, but sometimes you need to take an opportunity when somebody wants to give you something, even if it's outside your expertise per se, take it. And the one thing I've talked to people about this probably the last couple of years is, do you think anybody, and probably is going to be a CFO or a CEO, you think anybody like that would come to you and says, I want to give you this, talking to biomed, to take care of? Do you think they would give that to you if they don't trust you? Surely not. I mean, hopefully they're looking at different alternatives, right? This group, this group, this group. I trust biomed, I'm going to give it to them. So that you should take that as a compliment, that they have trust in you that you can take care of that. Now, yes, there can be challenges where if they're not giving you the people or the money to do that, it can be a challenge. You got to work with that. But take it as a compliment a little bit that they're asking you to do something else.
So I always trust the environment first. Then I go back to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good thing. I mean, I know it frustrates us sometimes, but a lot of times people will come to us first for stuff.
Always.
Yeah. I mean, we used to have IT people, they didn't want to go in the OR. Could you go in there for me and take a look at this? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Back when I was at Aurora, I sat down with our IT leadership group. And I think that the best way to build a relationship with them is to come to a common understanding. And often, especially in the imaging realm, there's a lot of ping pong being played between our frontline staff. You know, we're okay to say that they're not getting information from the PAC system. Okay. IT will say it's the modality, and our guys will say no, it's the network. And said enough of this, because who suffers is the patient, who suffers is the frontline staff, and they're not productive. So we sat down, came to that common understanding. We don't want that to happen. So let's develop a process and a workflow around that. Worst case scenario, we'll have both of our people standing in front of that to solve the issue, develop a good solid process flow that we shared with our respective teams and let them know what our expectations were. And by the way, if you reach out to that frontline guy from the other team and they don't respond, you let us know and we'll deal with it, because that's how we should be working.
Right. Yeah. I think he hadn't seen these slides, but I think he's setting me up for the next slide. Or pretty soon I have that in it somewhere. But he's right. I mean, I speak from experience too. You know, somebody, whatever work order database system they're using for IT, they're going to say it's biomed, and so they'll assign it to biomed. And then biomed says, no, this is IT, and it goes to IT, and IT says, no, it's not us, it's the help desk, or no, it's just the other group. And this thing bounces around forever. And Al said it perfectly. You know who suffers from it? It's the end user, and it's a clinical person. It's like, I just want somebody to fix it, right? And I think sometimes that's why people go directly to us, right? Can you just figure out what's going on? I can't get nobody to answer the phone, or it's getting bounced around. Okay, so we kind of talked about this. Majority of equipment now is going to reside on network somehow. It's also tied back to the server, maybe communicates to the cloud. I still think, even though I think we're kind of getting in this for a while, we still have an IT knowledge that we need to work on. And a lot of the existing medical equipment, we talked a little bit, but I didn't talk about that, why it becomes a cybersecurity concern. I'm sure a lot of you guys still have Windows 7 stuff that's out there, and you're finally getting the vendor says, okay, now we're going to come out with something for Windows 10 that'll work on that. Oh, thanks, because Windows 11's already been released. So it's like, yeah, it's like a catch-up game. Oh, we finally got the latest thing. Oh well, you know, 11's coming out next year. So this again, I think this is what drives IT people up the wall. It's like, how can you still be running something on Windows 7? It's like, well, first of all, they haven't come out with a Windows 10 solution. So what are we going to do, right? There's not a solution for it. Again, this is a simplistic view. IT managers, network and security, there are, and it's been a while since I was at the hospital, but there were some stuff, IT components that IT did not take care of. We had some serial to IP converters that worked on, I think, fetal monitoring system that we took care of. IT didn't do it. And they're probably going to be, there might be an HP computer in the like the cath lab, or going to be in the GI lab. That technically it's a computer, but it's running an application that the vendor is using, right? They're going to want you to support that. Definitely IT or HDM should support cybersecurity and patching. You can't do this without working with the other people though. HDM should partner with IT and the OEM on mapping out the layout of your medical equipment network. I hope you guys have never had to work on a network problem and not have basically a schematic. It's not good. If you're working somewhere, I would highly recommend you talk to whoever installed your network, which should be the vendor, right? And make sure you've got the latest drawings. And oh, by the way, has the drawings ever been changed? Because that could make it even worse. We've had some really bizarre problems on our network when I worked at Baylor that took forever to figure out, even when we call the vendor in. This is where I think we can start learning. This is where we're getting, how can I learn from IT? IT expects policies and procedures. And I go back, even when I was still a tech, and we actually took care of, gosh, this is probably in the 80s. We were taking care of they call it front-end processing system. So it was a big computer thing that interfaced with a big server. And for some reason, they gave it to Biomed. And we took care of those things. I went to school for a couple of weeks in Napa Valley, which was kind of fun. That's another story. But it was neat doing that type of stuff. And I remember this VP came up to me, he goes, well, what are you gonna do if this thing fails? I'm thinking, I'm gonna try to fix it. I'm gonna call a vendor. I'm gonna do this. He was looking for policies and procedures. So it's not, I don't have to figure it out in my mind. I've already got it mapped out what I'm gonna do. And I just couldn't understand that. But the older I've gotten, the more I worked with IT, I kind of appreciated why they had those things mapped out, right? There's no second guessing what you're gonna do. Here's what I do. You follow the map. Another thing was how and when you communicate downtime. Again, I'll pick on myself, you know, well, the patient monitoring down, when are you gonna get it fixed? Oh, when I get it fixed. I mean, I don't have a magic number when it's gonna happen. It's not broken. I'm trying to get a part in, I'm trying to call a vendor, I'm trying to do this. They want some communication on how it's gonna work. And then even down to how do you communicate? What's the expectation? How often do you communicate? Again, I learned more when I worked with IT about this. And we actually had a meeting once with, how many people take care of nurse call at your hospitals? A couple people? Yeah, nurse calls can be a nightmare because there's so many things. I mean, think about a floor. I got 25 beds. Well, there's 25 things in those rooms, plus a couple more, and the interface that goes back to everything else. There's a lot of moving pieces on a nurse call system. And I think I had a CNO at a hospital, not the naval officer, right, the nurse. She was telling me, she says, well, you know, tell me what's going to happen. And I think we had an issue where it didn't flow real well. And it took me a while. Then I finally realized, well, she's looking at what everybody else is giving her, which is a better communication channel, right? So ICU monitoring. So I was talking about nurse call, but same idea. ICU monitoring is down, not communicating with HR. So we communicate out, says a vendor's been called and should be on site by 8 p.m. Hopefully you're going to call it. If you're calling a vendor, they're going to tell you my ETA is X. Well, then tell somebody, right? We've called the vendor, they're coming out, they should be here at 8 o'clock. In the meantime, start your EMR downtime procedures and tell them notified. And then next communication, and this is what I learned from IT, when's your next communication? So whether it's every 30 minutes, whether it's every hour, whatever it is, come up with something so they know the vendor's still here. They're still working on a solution. Continue on with your downtime procedure. 10 o'clock, the vendor's still here, still working on that. Sounds redundant. They need to know what's going on. And again, continue until it's back up and done. That's what it's one of the best things I think I learned from IT. They did a great job of communicating when something goes down. Okay, side note there. Buy me a beer and we'll talk about it. So working with IT security, IT security, they have a lot of forms, but there's a reason for this. They use a risk analysis form. This is the form that we used at Baylor. It was designed by IT and approved by risk management, which those are two key words you need to understand. You should not be designing this. Those are the key people here, right? IT security and risk management. Then you put your network on, you put all your medical equipment that you're going to do on there that's going on a network. And of course, use your MDS squared form from the OEM to help complete that, or call the vendor if you can't get the information from them. Then IT and risk management should routinely ask you for reports on the status of your medical devices on a network, especially non-operating system, right? You're still running Windows 7. What are you going to do about it, right? So I'm sure Al would talk about his CMMS. They have a place where you can put all that stuff. We would use our database. We could query what OS is running on that, what patch level is running on that, and we could print that out, PDF, whatever you want to call it, spreadsheet, give it to IT and risk management, then they're going to want to know, what are you doing about it? Well, it's going to cost us $15 million, right, to replace all the patient monitoring or something. I think I'm close to ending. Even though I was in IT forever, you don't have to report to IT. To me, it's good and it's bad. It doesn't matter. The thing is, you need to know what you're talking about, but just get to know the major players. And to me, the major players are going to be security team, applications, and project management. Security's going to wonder what's allowed on the network, what version of OS, IP, all that type of stuff. What are you doing with patches? Also security, and we did have this problem at our hospital, a vendor. Now, I think most people have gotten to where thumb drives are not allowed anymore, right? I think almost everybody's that way now. I hope. You can't put a thumb drive in at all. But for a while when there was, I think we had a lab vendor come in and they actually messed up some lab equipment because there was a virus on there. I think one thing people tend to overlook a little bit is physical security. With a lot of times we think about the network security of a device. Don't forget that people will actually steal a device because it looks like a computer. A good example is an ultrasound machine that's just a portable laptop, right? They'll take it and they'll steal it. Yeah, we had one and we had to report it. And guess what? You're gonna get fined. Yeah, so don't forget that. In our database, we had a place for physical security. Now, you can say, well, I'll put a cable lock on it. Well, if I've got a laptop or if I've got an ultrasound unit that I'm pushing around, that's not gonna do me any good. You're gonna have to have some procedures in there where it's always stored in a locked room or something else. And what about unique? Most of you guys, especially more on the imaging side, you're gonna have people who are remoting in to do service on that. And a lot of times what I've seen, especially in the early days, everybody had a generic password and a different login. Holy cow, people. That would drive IT up the wall. And it makes sense. If some person left, now, yeah, the odds are probably slim that the guy would do anything malicious, but you can't trace who did it, right? You've got to put the common practices like you see at the hospital, unique sign on and log on, and those things should expire ever so often. There's a ton of, and I think these slides will be available so you don't have to worry about copying all these down. There's a ton of resources. I mentioned earlier, I subscribe to a lot of information on cybersecurity. I've connected with people that do cybersecurity on LinkedIn and I get a lot of stuff and that's how I kind of stay up to date. Definitely get to know your cybersecurity companies. Armis was just, they're the ones who are sponsoring this thing, which is kind of cool. But there's more and more. If you guys have been going to either MD Expo or AMI for a while, every year there's at least a couple of more people out there. And ever so often, one of the companies is swallowed up by a bigger company, right? And just learn from them. Just keep going to these. I've gone to so many of those things. It's just eventually things will start making sense, right? Not the first time. One thing I've seen over the years, and I haven't looked at this number probably for a couple of years, is you want to know ballpark what cybersecurity is going to cost you per se. It used to be a lot more. Now that there's so many people out there doing it, the cost now is about $25 a device. So think about it. If I got 10,000 pieces of equipment in my hospital, ballpark, how many are on the network? 50%. So 5,000 times $25, that gives you a ballpark of what's it going to cost me to do cybersecurity. Now I've heard pros and cons that sometimes there's other things you have to buy, but this is going to be your, I think that's pretty sure it's per year, not per month. You might ask the vendor when you go to the show out there to see if that's still relevant. A lot of these will also tie into your CMMS to auto-populate stuff, which is kind of neat, right? So instead of me, what we used to do is have techs entering the IP address and everything in a database, assuming they typed it in correctly and it didn't change. Well, now, if your CMS works with these vendors, it'll just automatically update, which is kind of cool. It's not automatically, you just don't plug it in the network and it auto-populates. There's still some work you got to do. There is some proactive monitoring, right? So I've got a CT monitor that's, communicating with Milwaukee or somewhere on the East Coast or something like that. And every so often it goes to China or it goes to Russia. Well, that's probably not where it should be going. And that's actually a pretty good thing, right? That's one reason, simplistically, why I would want to do that. Some claim utilization reporting, so they could actually tell how much a CT or MRI is being used. That's one of the questions I was asked from I think it was a VP and something, and it's a good question. Well, how often are we using it? Do I need to buy another one? Could I just move that somewhere else? Good question. Now, this is the thing what Al was talking about, and I think I got permission from you. I think I did it. I wrote down there, I got permission from Al and Amy, but just like he said, if you've got an application, you should have a flow chart that talks about who the key contacts are and what do you do if something happens. And you think, well, that's kind of overdoing it. Now, when something happens and something goes south, you need this. And also, one of the things it does help you with is what? Hold people to the fire. No, we agreed on this, and on this step, this is when you do it. One of the things that Amy did not too long ago was the gray area thing, right? I think they just came out with a gray. I did that years ago. What we did is I just sat down. Back then it was just engineering and biomed. Now it's engineering, biomed, and IT. And I just wrote down all the gray areas, booms, OR tables, sterilizer, stuff like that. And we did it by facility. Do you guys take care of this? Yes or no? Who does it? And we had it on the spreadsheet. And I used that several times. Oh, sorry, you guys said you do it. So that's where it goes. I've seen a lot of people over the years want to get PMO certification, PMP certification in biomed. If you've got a big enough IT department, why don't you let them do it? Why don't you let them run your project? And I guess the one question would be, well, they don't know anything about biomed. They don't need to. But they're a content. They're understanding how the process works. We used them several times when we were replacing all of our patient monitoring with a different vendor. We brought in one of these people like this. They were awesome. They got people on board, they got meetings done, they kept us on track. We're the subject matter experts, right? Biomeds, you're the SME, you're the one that knows how things work. The project manager is gonna help the project flow and go forward. Some of us are concerned about HTM going to IT. Now, I don't want to read this too wrong. I think it's a natural progression. I'm saying it's a natural progression our field changes, not necessarily it's gonna go into IT. So who remembers vacuum tubes? I was trained on vacuum tubes, right? A lot of people are. Well, we don't have that many vacuum tubes out there, right? I guess hopefully everybody got rid of the Bovies, right, with the vacuum tubes. But your skills are going to need to be updated in any field you go to. IT went from mainframe, if you'd say desktop computers, to cloud-based servers. HTM went from electronics to microprocessors to IT. Think of an auto mechanic today. Holy cow, who's opened their hood of their car lately? You open it up and it's like, yeah, forget it. I mean, it used to be you could get in your car and work on it. You can't do that now. And what can we learn? Policy procedures, managing downtimes, good at getting dollars for projects, really good at proactive to issues. So why don't we look to them for guidance on if they're doing this stuff real well, what can I learn from them?